see you here tonight. My name is Sasha and I'm the geologist and educator for the Waitaki Geopark. And as part of our outreach, we host public talks once a month. And this year we've been focusing on taking local content to local places. So we thought it was very apt to have someone from OceanaGold, Macraes, give a talk here in Palmerston. So good to see you all. Just a brief health and safety. Toilets, as you all know, are just out of the foyer here to the right. If for any reason we need to evacuate the building, there's an exit down there on the right there, or we'll go out the front here and the way that you came in and just meet out there in the field. If there's an earthquake, we need to get down and wait till the shaking stops, and then we will evacuate the building. So without much ado, I'm just going to hand over to Kate. Kate's going to be talking to us this evening. Gold Rocks is the title of her talk, so we're excited to hear what she has to say. And Kate's been working for 7 years up at Macraes. If you've got questions, she's happy to take them at the end of the talk as well. It is being filmed for YouTube, so just so you're aware. And we'll wrap up and by 7 o'clock this evening. So sit back, relax, and over to you, Kate.
Hi, my name's Kate. I actually did both my degrees down here at Otago. So I did bachelor's and master's in geology. And then I rapidly went up to Reefton. So I started working for OceanaGold at the end of 2012 up in Reefton. While I was up there, I came down and did a brief stint for Macraes as an exploration geo before getting back up. And when Reefton closed, I transferred down. So while I've been at Macraes, I have worked in the pit as a field tech. I've worked underground as a geologist, and I've worked in the pit as a geologist, and I now work as a project geologist for the resource and development team. So my main focuses now are working around ways we can use our data better, essentially. So whether that's for our resource models or for our in-pit grade control, I spend a lot of time looking at 3 computer screens and I've got numbers. So it's actually nice to get to talk about rocks for a change. So let's get into it. Basically, we're going to cover the geological history. So how is it that Macraes got to be where it is today, and what were the processes that happened along the way that means we now get to mine it for gold. So we'll have a brief history, we'll run through the geology that we deal with on a regular basis at Macraes, and what we look for, and how we find it, or how our exploration team finds it. So how do they go about identifying areas that we could be interested in and that we then put hits on. And following that, we have a wee bit at the end from our environmental team about our responsible mining, how we try to go about mining responsibly as best we can. So, as you all probably know, the High Macraes Shear Zone is in Eastern Otago, and it's just up the road. I'm guessing most of you know where it is. It is a regional scale structure, so its total length that we know of is about 30 kilometres, and it's what we call an orogenic gold deposit. So the gold deposit at Macraes was formed during a mountain building event. Currently, we have more than 10 million ounces in gold endowment, and we have mined and produced more than 5 million ounces at Macraes. So those 5 million ounces have come from a series of pits that are total length of about 16 kilometres when you go to the whole area with mine, and Fraser's underground, which I believe is about 345 metres below sea level currently. It is what we call a Phanerozoic gold deposit. So this means that it was produced in the last 541 million years. It's hosted in rocks that are 200 to 145 million years old. So they've been around for a while, they've been through quite a lot, and that's why we have Macraes. And the gold was emplaced, or the gold was deposited here between 100 and 145 million years ago. So if we go back to the very beginning that we know of, you can see we have little old New Zealand on the side. This is when we were still attached to Gondwana. So it was about, I think it's about 350 million years ago, a long time ago. And at that time, we definitely didn't look like we did now, or do now. And we were still part of Gondwana. As you can see, where Macraes, you look where Macraes and Reefton are, you can see we have the South Island here, North Island, and then the West Coast. So that's what it used to look like. We've got Australia, East Antarctica and West Antarctica, and you can see where that Lachlan area, so you know that the Lachlan goldfields over in Australia, so they get a lot of gold out of there. And that was where we were when this story started. And this is what it looked like if you look at a cross section. So when New Zealand was attached to the side of Gondwana, we were actually on a subduction zone. We have subduction zones around the country, we have them in New Zealand. So they're where one tectonic plate is going under another one. Currently we have one that runs from Kaikoura all the way up the east coast of the North Island. So if you imagine we've cut the North Island in half, not cut it off completely, just in half, this is what it would look like. So over here we've got our trench with the sea, sort of like the Hickarani trench that we've got. And then we have these are what we call accretionary sediments. So as this lower plate has gone underneath the one above it, the sediments on it kind of just get pushed up against it, just like you're scraping mud off concrete with a shovel. You make a nice pile at the end. And then, so that's our Rakaia terrain, that is the sediments that these rocks were originally deposited as. As you go further inland from that where that subduction zone starts, you end up with what they call an accretionary complex with metamorphic rocks. We also have an ophiolite belt in New Zealand, and that's where part of the sea floor has been pushed up. So it's usually quite distinctive. They're a lot higher than iron and magnesium rocks, quite different from what we have just lying around the east coast of New Zealand. Then we then have a four-arc basin and a magmatic arc. What happens when these subduction zones go down underneath is those sediments have a lot of water in them, and it gets a lot hotter as they go further down, and the pressure builds up because you're pushing everything together. So you get a lot of pressure and you get temperature increasing, and as you increase fluids, your rocks behave differently as well. And that's what's happened here. We also get what we call metamorphic rocks from those changes in pressure and temperature. And the Otago schist is a very good example of a metamorphic rock. So you get, like the schist tours, how you can see the layers in it sometimes, it looks like a block. That's because they're a metamorphic rock. That's what's happened as it's been squished together very slowly, very slowly. What we also get is shear zones. So shear zones are kind of like a fault, but because they're quite deep and because it's quite hot and there's a lot of pressure and fluid, those rocks move more like a liquid, a very slow moving liquid. So it's kind of like if you melt sand to make glass, and you can move it, they can blow glass because it behaves more like a liquid if you keep it hot. So it's like that. It's hot, so you can move it more like a liquid. Whereas your normal fault is colder and harder, so it will just break and it just grinds. So while all these sediments were being pushed along on this subduction zone, we had these ones at the very edge. So these guys are thinner, they're the last ones in the line, and they still remain fairly similar to a sedimentary rock. They haven't had a lot of pressure, they haven't had a lot of temperature changes. And that's the grey wackies, that's the basement rock in Canterbury. So they don't have the layers like the schists do. Then we get into Otago, and we've got the Otago schist. What also happens when you do this is you get faults, because sometimes there's just too much movement, and so you generate these faults. And this is important later on as to why we have these faults. We have what we call normal faults. And a normal fault is, I think it actually came about in Scotland, in the coal miners, and all of a sudden they'll be going along their wee coal drive, and it would just disappear. It would completely vanish on them. And that's because a fault had come through. And because it usually happened a certain way, that became normal. So they knew that if this fault was here, then all they had to do was go back and up a wee bit, and they'd be back into that same coal, and they'd just carry on. It's also where the term hanging wall came from. So we use hanging wall a lot, and that's because the top of the coal is what they hung their lanterns on. So the top of what they were mining is called the hanging wall. And that's how we get some of the conventions that we have today, and we definitely use at Macraes. So those normal faults do become quite important later on. So then what happened after we started building mountains is that at about 145 to 100 million years ago, Gondwana started to break up. So we left Antarctica behind, we left Australia behind, we decided we'd just quite happily go off and do our own thing. And we had extinction. So we went from building mountains to getting lower. So as we extended and moved away, we also got a bit of erosion, and we got below sea level, and we got sediments depositing on top of what we now call the Otago schist. So that carried on till probably about 23 million years ago, when we got the modern plate boundary that runs up the west coast of the South Island and then switches over to run up the east coast of the North Island. So that is your alpine fault. And as you will all be aware, we have the Southern Alps along the alpine fault, so we're back into mountain building again. And what happened when we started mountain building is everything got uplifted, and we started to expose the Otago schist underneath. So if you go up to Canterbury, there's lots of lovely big sediments. You know, Castle Hill and places like that, they've got beautiful big cliffs of sediments. In Otago, we've got schistals because that's all been eroded. And what it's done is bring those metamorphic rocks that were in the middle and under all that pressure and all that temperature and turned into metamorphic rocks. It's brought them up to the surface here in Otago. And it hasn't done it evenly, because we've got more uplift towards the alpine fault. The ones that were further down, that had more pressure and more temperature, are up in the Southern Alps, and the ones that are in Otago aren't as high grade, and the ones on top of our Macraes aren't as high grade again. So it's like a big dome, and we've just gone and sliced the top off and pushed one end up and taken a bit more off. So that's the history. So that's how we get to today, and how we now have a lovely gold mine in Otago. So this is what we're talking about. This is what we've got now. So Macraes is up here. We've got Dunedin, and the Waihemo Fault, and Nentthorn, Central Otago, Glenorchy shot over. So all the red lines on there represent places where historically we have mined gold in the Otago region. And down the bottom here, looks a bit blurry to me, I don't know how well you guys can see it. This is what your metamorphic rocks look like. So at the top, in lower pressures and lower temperatures, we have what we call lower grain schist. and then we have the upper grain schist and amphibolite facies. And they all have, they're based on different minerals they have on them that form at different pressures and temperatures, and that's how we know how deep we've gone. So we have the shallowest ones on the sides, and the deepest ones are up near the alpine fault and the central Otago. At Macraes, we also have what we call a shear zone, and that is where our gold has been concentrated. And this is what we're going to look at now. So when Macraes formed, as that mountain building was going forwards or being undertaken, we went from deeper in the crust, so higher temperatures and pressures, to shallower, so lower temperatures and pressures. And as that happened, the rocks went from moving in more what we call a ductile manner, so it's more of a liquid or a soft solid, to moving less like that and more like a rock, and more just breaking up and acting quite rigid. And our ore zone actually reflects that in the rocks that we have, in the rocks that we see in the pit. So what we think happened first is that we got what we call lode schist. And lode schist is quite, we call it the form. It's like if you take your pages in your phone book and try to bend them or fold them as many times as you can, that's what our rocks are like. So they're quite bent, they have some areas which haven't moved as easily as others, so everything's gone around it. And it has a lot of graphite, because as those liquids rise, so when the subduction zone goes down and the liquids rise, what happens is they pick up all kinds of things along the way. So they pick up arsenic, and they pick up iron, and they pick up sulphur, and they pick up gold. And they also pick up tungsten. Anything that's around, anything that thinks that being in the waters or in the fluids is a lot better idea than being in the rock it's in, is going to jump in and hitch a ride. So one of those things that does that is carbon. So our lode schist, as it's moved and had these liquids coming through it, there's actually quite a lot of carbon in it, and it's quite dark. It can be quite black looking compared to normal grey schist. And so that's what happened first. As those rocks were still moving quite softly, it's just gone along, and one direction, as the rocks around them have moved, it's just deformed everything in between and just folded it. And the fluids have gone through, and because it's a wee bit colder and the pressure's decreased a little bit, some things are in there just fall out. They can't stay in the fluid anymore. As we moved higher up, so as the rocks got more brittle, we started to get what we call silicified breccia. So as the rocks have moved, they've actually broken, they've started breaking. But what's happened is those fluids have come through, and they're so full of silica that we get quartz. So this is why we call it silicified breccia. Along with all that silica in there, there's also gold, and there's also tungsten, and there's also arsenic, and iron and sulphur. And so they all start to come, they all fall out with the quartz, and you end up with all these grey layers and grey areas around the white quartz is all very full of what we call arsenopyrite or sulphides and gold. Moving higher up, the rocks are a lot more brittle, and we start to see what we call stockwork veins. Our stockwork veins have formed as you're moving the rocks. You actually get fractures, and while some areas are undergoing a lot of pressure, other areas just break open, and so those fluids have gone up through there and deposited there and hardened there. The way I always think about it is if you get a really big book and you push the pages on an angle, you always get the gap by the spine. That's the way I think of it, is that's what's happened, is they've been pushing the rock so much that you get gaps. It just breaks apart. And so quite often these veins, you'll see how there's layers in them, and that's because it's broken and filled in. And then it's broken again and filled in again, and they just get bigger and bigger. And so we can get tiny little veins that are about 1 millimetre across, or we can get some that are up to like half a metre or a metre wide. And quite often, especially the bigger ones, have a lot of gold, and a lot of arsenic, and a lot of pyrite. The final stage of the mineralisation, so we're higher up, the rocks are colder, they're a lot more brittle, is what we call the hanging wall. So this has happened at the top, and it usually happens right next to where we've got that silicified breccia. And it's basically a fault with a lot of liquid going through it. So it's ground everything up, it's very permeable, and as soon as you start making that rock permeable, the fluids just use it as a super highlighter. And as they get colder, they deposit gold, iron, and sulfide, and actually calcium, tungsten, you get a whole range of things. And graphite. So some of our hanging walls, you could probably actually write with them. They're full of graphite, absolutely full of it. So that was the end of what we call the mineralisation. The cataclysite and the hanging walls were the last thing to do. And the hanging wall, the cataclystic hanging wall, very typically denotes the top of our wall in a lot of places. Following that, we had the footwall fault develop. So those normal faults I was going on about earlier, they turned into what we call, they got bigger. So when a normal fault's created, it's because things are being pushed up, and they're quite low angle, they're usually I think about 30 degrees. It's like making a ramp. You don't make a steep ramp when you want to try and push something up, you make a nice shallow one. And what happened as these rocks have risen, and we've broken away from Gondwana, is those faults that went up, actually a really good place to go down as well. So they've gotten a lot bigger, because it's easier to go downhill than it is to go uphill. And they've turned into these really big regional structures. And so where the younger rocks are sitting on top of the older rocks, so the lower green schist are on top of the upper green schist facies rocks, we have a big fault. And there is quite a change in the rocks when we go through that fault. The chemistry is quite different, and the way they have developed is different, and they look very different. So we can always tell when we've drilled through the footwall fault when we're doing our exploration drilling. And that cut off the bottom of our ore body. So at the moment, what we mine on top is what we call textural zone 2 green schist. What we mine underneath is textural zone 3. So it's a lot more quartz, it's a lot green. Some places it is a lot greener, and it's a lot coarser grain than what we mine. So that's all well and good, but what do these rocks look like? So because we have a lot of iron and sulfide and arsenic, we have two very important sulfides, pyrite, which some of you may know as fool's gold, and arsenopyrite, which is pretty much a silver version. So that's a rock with some pyrite on it there. I don't think we had a good one on arsenopyrite. But what's happened is, at Macraes, it's not often we see free gold. It's very, very rare that we see free gold. There's one, you see, this is your normal size pencil, that's some gold. You may want to come up and look a bit closer at it. What we do have is the pyrite and the arsenopyrite have gold in them. So they've kind of, as they've formed, the gold's gone, oh wait, me too, and just jumped on in there. And that's why we have to have the autoclave, because we have to heat those sulfides up to break them down, to be able to break them down and get the gold out. And we can only do that with a lot of pressure and a lot of temperature. We also have our lovely glow-in-the-dark rocks, or glow under the black light rocks. So we have scheelite, which has tungsten in it, and Macraes actually started out as tungsten mines. They weren't gold mines originally. We also can see, this is what the graphite looks like. You can see it's very black. Sometimes you'll pick it up and it's like picking up sticky clay. It's just so ground down. And that one has a lot of pyrite on it too. And this is just one of the big quartz veins. There's a spray paint can the size. And that's what we sort of look at in the pit sometimes, if we're lucky. And that's one of our, that's a big quartz vein up near Coronation actually. So now furthest away mine will pit towards Reefton. So that's what we want to find. So that's the geology of Macraes. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. Now we can get into exploration. So how do the guys go find the gold? How do we know where to look? When you do resource work or exploration, you start out prospecting, usually, at the start before you put a pit in. So prospecting's where it's basically feet on the ground. You do things like soil sampling, you do mapping, you go pan streams, you're looking for things to give you an indication that there might be gold around here somewhere. And it's very cheap. Compared to everything else in mining, prospecting's cheap. You're just paying people, and maybe a bit of diesel. If when you go, hey, look, there might be something here, we need to start drilling. As soon as you start drilling, it gets very expensive. Very, very expensive, especially probably now with the way diesel prices are. So, but what drilling does is it decreases your risk by giving you more information. The more information you have, the less risk a prospect has. So there's this catch-22 when you're doing exploration with how much you want to spend and how much risk you're comfortable with. Okay? You can spend millions. It's easy to spend $50 or $100 million. But how much do you want to spend? How much is it going to be worth? And how much risk are you comfortable with? So this is essentially the game the exploration team are in. That didn't work, did it? So this is what a prospecting map looks like. This is probably soil samples. So when they do their soil sampling, when they're prospecting, what they want to find, what they do is they want to sample that layer of soil just above the bedrock. And they're not actually looking for gold. We know at Macraes that we have arsenic and we have tungsten. And we also have some antimony. And they're all metals and they'll all sit in that soil profile. So that's what we sample for when we do soil sampling. Sediment, stream sediment's different. We all know there's been alluvial mining in Otago, so you can just walk up a stream and go pan and look for gold. You can do geophysical stuff. That's probably more common in Australia for iron mines and things like that, where they're looking for big magnetic anomalies. An iron mine is a very big magnetic anomaly. You can cover a lot of ground pretty quickly if you want to do things like that. But here we do soil sampling. We'll go out mapping, so usually we'll get some geos out of uni and send them out mapping because they're fit and young and they don't mind walking around all day in the sunshine. We've gotten used to sitting in an office and it's warm and there's coffee. And we do that. We'll have a look. If you can see some of these places, you're like, hey look, there might be something there, might be something along here. Then we'll go through and try. So those areas become an area of interest to us. We have two ways that we drill up at Macraes. We have what the first way and the cheapest way is called RC drilling, and that's percussion drilling. So it's called reverse circulation, but I think of it as rock chip. because that's what you get out of the end. What happens is, as the drill goes down, there's a lot of air, they have a lot of compressed air, and basically it grinds its way through the rock, just like an auger would, and everything that you've ground away of the rock goes sent back up inside of the drill rod. So you get a lot of gravel at the end, basically, a lot. You might get, now blast hole rigs will get about 50 or 60 kgs for 2.5 metres. So I'd say that's probably close to double, or it might be about the same for these RC rigs. Might be about 50 or 60. And we can log that. So we put it in bags straight off the drill, so it goes through the splitter, the big yellow splitter, and we all have a calico bag on the end of there. And so we'll just go through, and every metre we'll take a sample of that metre, and it goes in a bag, and it goes off to the lab, and they tell us whether or not we have gold. Hopefully we have gold. We also can log it, so we will keep a log of the chips to see what the geologist thinks of what rocks we're drilling through. But it can be quite hard to tell what you've got from chips. And these RC rigs take up a big footprint. So this is one RC rig here. Usually they have a compressor on the drill rig because they need a lot of air. They soak up a lot of air. So they have a support vehicle as well, and usually another support vehicle. So this one will have another compressor on it, and this one's carrying all their rods. And that's a big truck. That's probably the equivalent to the front of the truck and trailer unit by the time you try to manoeuvre it. Especially considering most of them are at least, I think some of them about 6-wheel drive. They're big, heavy trucks.
So we couldn't quite hear that.
Some of them have got probably about 6-wheel drive. You know, they don't manoeuvre. Anyone who's driven a 4-wheel drive knows they don't turn quickly if you're in 4-wheel drive. You could probably do a whole lap at the supermarket car park. So they take up a lot of room, but they're pretty cheap. What we can also do is what we call diamond drilling. Apparently we don't drill for diamonds though. That's to do with the drill bit. They have diamonds on the drill bit to be able to cut through the rock. And what a diamond drill does is it actually gives you back core. So this is what we get out of a diamond drill. As geologists, this is a lot better for us. You can see what rocks you're drilling through, you can see what rocks have the gold in, and if you do what we call oriented core, so we know exactly what direction that core is in and where we are on the core with relation to the rocks around it, it gives us a lot of information about the structure of the ground underneath it and how that might affect our ore zone and how that then affects how we want to mine. So with diamond core, the drillers will bring it into the core shed, the geos go along and they put metre marks on it, so you can see a couple here, so it's 268 and 269, so that's metres below the surface. They then go along and log it, so we'll go along and go, this is breccia, this is cataclysite, this is lode schist, this is waste, we're not interested in all in this. There's a big fault, we might want to know about that later because that could create problems if we want to put a pit in. All those sorts of things. What we can do with core as well is when we sample it, we actually cut it in half or we cut it into quarters. So we send half or quarter of it down to the lab and then we keep the rest of it. So we have a reference later on and we have it available to sample or to look at or to investigate if we need to at a later date. So luckily at Macraes, we are very data rich. We have been there for 30 years. We've been drilling a lot of holes and we've been very busy. So currently we have a 30-kilometre long by 5-kilometre wide land holding. I think we actually we're one of the higher up companies or people for owning the amount of land we do in New Zealand. We have a large area. We have done around 1 million metres of surface and underground resource drilling. That's 1,000 kilometres. I know when I drive to Blenheim, it's 691 kilometres to get to my mum's house. It's a very long amount of coal and resource and RC drilling. We've also done around 3 million surface grade control holes. So they're the holes we do in the pit, they're the holes we use as glass holes. We're drilling them to blow the rock up, we might as well sample them, and if we get the samples off them, we get better definition of our ore body. And we also know exactly what we're digging up. We've got about 10,000 surface structural measurements, so that's when the geologists wander around with a compass and try to tell us which direction rocks are going in. Sometimes I do that. We also have 25,000 soil samples from prospecting around the place and 1,000 stream sediment samples. So we have a huge amount of database space, and we have 3 databases to look after all of that. We have, from what we know, about 36 kilometres of what we call hanging wall surface, so that's the top of the ore body. About 30 kilometres of that has been drilled, so drilled down to at least 100 by 200 metre staggered drill hole spacing. So it's at least 100 to 200 metres between holes, and the holes are always staggered. So all of that data gets analysed and correlated by geologists. And opportunities within the gold field are assessed, so we're always trying to find more gold. We've been there for a long time. We would very much like to be there for a while longer. So in order to do that, in order to stay there, and in order to be able to keep doing what we're doing, we have to mine responsibly. So what is responsible mining, and how do we think we're going to do it? We look after the lizards. So we do a lot of monitoring. We monitor dust, we monitor the water, we monitor noise, and we monitor vibration. The Macraes township is actually quite close to the mine, and some people's houses on the farms are quite close to the mine. And they should be able to live there quite happily without having to worry too much about what we're up to. So our monitoring program that the environmental team does is over about 6,000 sets of analyses to make sure that we are doing what we need to be doing and we're not damaging the environment. So most of our monitoring is done on water. Around the place, we monitor for the water for actually a very large area around the mine site, and we monitor the water in the mine site. So what we're looking for in the water mainly is sulfates. So pyrite and arsenic pyrite are iron and arsenic sulfides, so they have a lot of sulfate in them. When you put those minerals in, you dig them up and expose them to air, iron oxidizes, it rusts. So you can end up with sulfur in your water, or sulfates in your water. So we do have to watch for that, and we do take it into account when we're building our waste rock stacks and things like that, that any rocks that have the potential of having a lot of sulfides in them aren't on the surface. We don't want to put sulfates in the water. We also analyse for nitrates because we use ANFO. So we use ammonium nitrate in our blasts. And if we monitor nitrates, then that means we can keep track of any leftover or any unburned explosives that might be getting into the environment. We don't want that to be happening. Our ecology and biodiversity, so we have a plant rescue. We build lizard hotels. So that's a wee video of the lizard hotel building. So we have gone along and specifically kept big rocks to build wee lizard hotels all over the place, so they still have an environment to live in. So it's one of the jobs our environmental team do. We have over 700 hectares of land in ecological covenants to protect them for us and protect them from everyone else. We have a lot of heritage, so we maintain 10 heritage or historical features in the Macraes district. So that includes Stammers, we've got to look after the pub, the stables in Macraes, and Gaytan's house and another, the Murphy's tailings hummocks. So not just buildings, but also land areas as well, to protect them for their historic significance. We have rehabbed over 622 hectares in total. We have certification for our tailings management that we have to maintain. I believe that it is renewed annually. So we have to keep our tailings dams built in a certain way, and we have to manage them to stay compliant. We also have a site-wide water management system, a very detailed site-wide water management system. Part of that is our trout pond. So we have the Take a Kid fishing days and that up in the trout pond, and that is part of the environmental side as well. We have closure bonds. We have a lot of money tied up in closure bonds with the council. And the idea is that if anything were to happen, if we were to stop mining, there is enough money for them to be able to rehab the whole area. It shouldn't cost, so it doesn't cost the taxpayer anything. And that is the purpose of having a bond. So where do the environmental team see the future of our mining? They're actually looking at ongoing water use efficiencies. So sulfates and nitrates are good fertilisers. If we have water coming out that we can use for irrigation in those times of drought, or when there's not a lot of rainfall, then we can use that on the farmland around the mine site. And we have to adapt to the national policy statement for freshwater management. So that's where it came in 2020. Farmers have to fence off waterways, things like that, and I think it's to do with the winter grazing, not bogging the products up too much. And for us as a mine, that's protecting wetlands and waterways. So when we don't want to be damaging any wetlands or waterways. We have a commitment to biodiversity. So they have what they call a managing effects through mitigation hierarchy, which is basically what we have to do at each level within the company and how we interact with our community to ensure that we have no net loss or net gain in biodiversity. It's all very well to not want to destroy something, but we also don't want to destroy it by adding something else in there that wasn't in the first place, or creating an imbalance in what was already there. And climate change. So we have a commitment to net zero carbon in 2050, and we want a 30% reduction in cumulative emissions by 2030, running as per normal. So that's diggers still swinging, trucks still running, but we've got less emissions. So to do that, we've actually bought a new electric excavator. So that's going to be turning up next year, I believe, and it'll be a new challenge for us. And they're going to try or investigating putting in a whole heap of solar to run the plant during the daytime. So we're not drawing off the power grid during the daytime. So we do have these projects going on in the background to try and do our bit to do what we can. And that is the end of it, I believe. So thank you very much for staying awake and listening.
Thank you very much, Kate. That's all right. That's amazing. Well, I think that was a really well thought out and step-by-step talk, and you covered everything. So I definitely learnt a lot this evening. So thank you very much, and I'm sure you all have learnt something new this evening as well. Is anyone got a question?
How many other gold bearing gear zones are there? Like I said, yours the biggest and the other ones
I think, is it Santana Minerals are drilling one out at the moment, or they're doing exploration of one at Rise and Shine. So, I think there are more out there, but not all the gold in Otago is the same as Macraes. There are other ways that it turned up, other mechanisms. But I think we definitely are the biggest at the moment. See what people find.
Yeah.
The antimony and the tungsten and things like that, which are highly valuable, we never hear about that, but that must be being melted down into blocks and sold or whatever you do with it too. I mean, they're valuable minerals and metals.
They are. I don't think we have enough antimony to mine.
Oh, right.
We do have quite a bit of tungsten, but our plant isn't capable of processing it. And tungsten also gravity settles.
So is tungsten also?
Gravity settles, it's very heavy.
Oh, yes.
So they use gravity to get it out, and ours is quite fine grained.
Right.
So it's not the easiest
Right.
to get out either.
So
But
in other words, you're not able to.
currently we're not able to process or
Right.
refine it.
On the course, the drilling, it was 290 metres. He said, what's the deepest drill?
Oh. I think it's not unusual for us to get up into the 2-300s. I know I've had R series going into the 2-300s. We don't have to drill too deeply here. When they were drilling over in the coast, they were drilling up to about 800 metres or something. So we're lucky in that aspect.
Any other questions about it?
And Fraser's Pit is now underground as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so the Fraser's underground mine does come out through the bottom of Fraser's Pit. The portal is there, and it goes out towards under the tailings dam, the temporary tailings dam up there.
And I appreciate, Kate, that this isn't really in your area, but it's a pity that that viewing area of Fraser's Pit, which had those very nice information boards and everything else, I quite often take visitors up there because they're fascinated by the mine and fascinated by Fraser's Pit, but those viewing boards and everything is incredibly sad and untimely.
Yeah, yes, they have. I think they're not as accessible as they once were either, is probably why
Right.
that is also the case. But we will be moving closer towards the road with where we're mining. If anyone's been up recently, you'll see that where we put the new underbridge in, the diggers are getting quite close to them now. So maybe that's something our environmental team can look at, putting a new one in, so people can have a look and refurbishing everything.
And that wonderful Mark Hill sculpture should be back on top of the hill.
Well, I think the problem is it blew off and got broken.
Oh, got through.
Or it got broken in the wind.
Because it requires a helicopter to move. Anyway.
Yeah.
Just have a word in somebody's ear, please.
No worries. I'll see what I can do.
It is, that was a great viewing platform because it's really interesting for people that don't work in the mine.
Yeah.
So I think unless you've been there, you don't appreciate the scale.
Exactly.
It's the scale of it is just mind-blowing, of the depths of the pits, and you don't really get it until you see these massive trucks that just look tiny in the bottom of the pits. And, yeah.
What's going to happen to the big hole?
So the idea when we've rehabbed all of Macraes is there's going to be some native plantings and some farmland, and the holes are going to be big ponds. They will take a while to fill up.
Centuries.
Yeah, they're going to take, but one day they will be a pond, or a big lake. The Reefton one is filling up quite nicely, but they get a lot more rain.
Yes.
And all the rock up on the ridges, what's going to happen with that?
The steep areas will probably get tussock, and stuff like that. Anything we can make flat and suitable for grazing will probably be made flat for suitable and grazing. Everything else will be planted in natives.
There seems to be a lot of jobs advertised at Oceania.
Yeah.
Is that because of expansion or just because there's a naturally high turnover? That's not a geological question.
So the borders are open. People can go work in Aussie. Aussie is screaming out for workers. They desperately want workers, to the point where we've seen geology jobs advertised that say geology degree optional but not required. And they pay good money because they can't get people, so they're paying a lot of money.
So that's what's happening.
Yeah, anyone who doesn't need to be here permanently or want to be here permanently, they'll just go.
There's a couple of videos of underground phrases on YouTube.
Right.
Well, thank you very much, Kate. So we just have a wee goodie bag for you of local goodies, delicacies. To say thank you very much for coming this evening and spending time with us to educate us all about the geology of the area and in particular the gold aspect of it and how it's all been formed and how it's looked for and extracted. So thank you very much. Just give you a round of applause.